scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Daddy Pig was in his study, engrossed in his newspaper. But the rustling of the pages sounded like dry, brittle wings. The antique globe on his desk spun slowly on its own, its continents shifting and blurring. A faint, musty smell filled the room. The ink on the newspaper began to bleed, forming strange, cryptic symbols. Daddy Pig seemed oblivious. The bookshelves appeared to lean precariously. A cold draft swept through the room. Peppa tiptoed to the study door. The familiar ticking of Daddy Pig /S watch had morphed into a slow, deliberate thumping. The air grew heavy. The symbols on the newspaper began to glow with a faint, sickly green light. Daddy Pig looked up, his eyes wide and unseeing. He spoke, but his voice was not his own. He gestured towards the globe, which now pulsed with the same green light. The continents on it rearranged themselves into a map of an unknown, terrifying place. The books on the shelves began to fall. The study was no longer a place of quiet contemplation. Peppa backed away, her heart pounding. The thumping of the watch grew louder. The green light intensified. Daddy Pig rose from his chair, his movements stiff and unnatural. The study door slammed shut, trapping her inside. The air grew thick with an unseen presence. The house was no longer a home, but a predator. The finality of her fate hung heavy in the air. The walls seemed to close in. There was no escape, no hope. Only the hungry silence and the unblinking eye of their doom. The house had claimed its prize, and the game was over. For now.
Peppa Pig, Eyes in the Dark. In the Pig family's house, an unusual silence reigned. Lately, George had hardly spoken to his sister. He no longer played with his dinosaur, didn't ask for bedtime stories, and didn't laugh the way he used to. Instead, he spent long hours sitting at the table by the window, clutching a pencil. Sheets of paper were scattered everywhere, on the floor, on the chair, even by the bed. All of them were covered with the same strange symbols, circles with short lines, resembling eyes. "George, what are these drawings?" Peppa asked cautiously. Her brother slowly turned to her. His gaze was unusual, heavy, and somehow too grown up. "You'll find out soon," he whispered, and bent over the papers again. Peppa felt her little hooves grow cold. George was becoming more and more withdrawn, as if his attention was fixed on something she couldn't see. One night, when they were both already lying in their beds, Peppa noticed that George wasn't asleep. He sat right on his sheets, staring at the ceiling. His eyes shimmered strangely, reflecting the moonlight. But there was no warmth in that gleam. It felt as if a bottomless depth was hiding inside them, one she could fall into. "George," Peppa whispered. He didn't answer. He only smiled, in a way he had never smiled before. The next morning, George's bed was empty. His favorite dinosaur lay torn to pieces on the floor. Above his pillow, on the wall, scratches had appeared. Symbols like eyes, as if someone had carved them with a sharp claw. "George!" Peppa called. But the room remained silent. She rushed through the house, searching for her brother in the garden, the kitchen, the living room. But George was nowhere. Everything around her felt too quiet, as if time itself had stopped. When Peppa returned to their room, her eyes fell on the large mirror hanging on the wall. Her heart froze. In the reflection behind her stood George. She spun around quickly. No one was there. But in the mirror, he remained, staring. His eyes glowed with a dim, sickly light, and his lips stretched into a smile. Peppa backed away, and then she noticed that next to George in the reflection sat Labubu. The toy looked almost the same as always, but its eyes flickered with a red glow. On its face lingered the same eerie smile as George's. "George is no more," came a strange voice from the mirror. It was low, drawn out, and echoed both in the room and inside her head. Peppa pressed herself to the wall. The surface of the mirror rippled like water. The shapes of George and Labubu moved forward, toward the glass. Their outlines became sharper, as if they were about to break through. "No!" Peppa screamed. She dashed toward the door, but suddenly froze. In the mirror, her own bed reflected as empty. And on it sat Labubu, very close now, with glowing eyes and a crooked smile. The mirror trembled, and the shadows nearly tore their way out. Peppa squeezed her eyes shut, unable to look. When she opened them again, the mirror was ordinary. The room was silent. Only George's bed remained empty. Later that night, when their parents had gone to sleep, Peppa sat on her bed, staring at the shelf where Labubu now stood again. He looked harmless, soft, and familiar. But now she knew the truth. His eyes were no longer lifeless buttons. In their dim glow flickered the same cold emptiness she had seen in George. And in the corner of the room, near the mirror, a crack was slowly spreading. It widened as if something unseen was watching from behind the wall.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Mummy Pig was preparing dinner, but the food on the table began to move on its own. The carrots wriggled like worms, the potatoes pulsed with a faint, internal light, and the peas rolled off the plate and scurried across the floor like tiny, green insects. The familiar aroma of cooking was replaced by a strange, earthy smell, mixed with something sweet and sickly. Peppa and George watched in horror as the vegetables began to coalesce, forming a grotesque, pulsating mass in the center of the table. It grew larger, slowly taking on a vaguely humanoid shape, with two glowing green eyes emerging from its surface. Mummy Pig, her back turned, continued to hum, oblivious to the monstrous transformation occurring behind her. The kitchen grew cold, and the familiar sounds of cooking were replaced by a faint, squelching noise. The monstrous vegetable creature began to twitch, then to rise, its form dripping with a viscous, green liquid. It let out a low, guttural groan, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. The kitchen, once a place of nourishment, was now a scene of unimaginable horror. The familiar comfort of their home was replaced by a chilling sense of dread, as the food they were about to eat transformed into a living nightmare. The creature took a step, its root-like feet squelching on the tiled floor. It reached out a tendril, its glowing eyes fixed on Peppa. The house was no longer safe, for a monstrous hunger had awakened within its walls. The familiar comfort of their dinner time had become a terrifying encounter with a sentient, malevolent entity. The food was alive and it was hungry.
Peppa Pig, the letters on the wall. It started with a single phrase, a small message, as if scratched by something blunt. On the wall by the stairs, right under the handrail. Daddy Pig first thought George had been playing with a sharp toy block. "Who wrote this?" he asked at breakfast. "Not me," said George. "Me neither," added Peppa. "What does it say?" Daddy Pig frowned. "You forgot me." They thought it was just a childish prank. Mummy Pig wiped the wall with a damp cloth, and the writing disappeared. But the next morning, it showed up again, somewhere else, near the kitchen door. Same words. "You forgot me." "Mummy," said Peppa, "maybe it's leftover chalk. Or someone's drawing at night." "No one's drawing, Peppa. It's just a coincidence." But on the third day, the writing was in Peppa and George's room, right next to the bed, written by a small hoof, tiny letters, crooked pressure, as if whoever wrote it was rushing or didn't know how to hold the chalk. "I didn't write it," Peppa repeated. "I swear." "Maybe you just don't remember," Mummy said gently. "Maybe it happened in a dream." But Peppa hadn't been asleep. She remembered clearly. And that night, she woke up to a soft sound, a scratchy noise, dry, like something scraping against plaster. She sat up and saw the bedroom door slightly open. Light from the hallway fell on the wall, and there, In the shadow, something moved. Peppa couldn't see a face, only a hoof, scraping against the wall again and again. When she turned on her nightlight, the figure was gone. But a new message had appeared. You erased me. Now the writings showed up every day, in the bathroom, on the wardrobe, under the table, even on the inside of the window glass, all written by one hoof, all saying the same thing. Who is it? Peppa asked George. Maybe it's someone you forgot, he whispered. On the sixth night, Peppa woke up and saw someone writing on the wall right in front of her bed. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The figure didn't turn around, just a shadow, a shape, and when the message was finished, it melted into the darkness, quiet, smooth. You were me. Peppa shivered. Her eyes moved to the mirror, and she saw a reflection, herself, almost. But the one in the mirror didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, and words began to appear on the glass. You took my place. In the morning, Mummy Pig called her for breakfast. Peppa, aren't you hungry? Peppa didn't reply. She didn't feel like herself anymore. And on the wall above the table appeared one final message, written in that same crooked hoof writing. Now you are forgotten.
Peppa Pig, the new friend. One sunny morning, Peppa and George were playing in the garden when a strange piglet approached them. He had pale gray skin, odd eyes with a reddish tint, and a quiet, muffled voice. Hi, I'm Simon, he said with a smile. Hi, Simon. Do you want to play with us? Peppa asked cheerfully. Simon nodded, but his smile seemed a little off to Peppa. George also looked uneasy, but they decided Simon was just their new friend. At first, they played harmless games. Simon suggested hide and seek, but chose the strangest hiding places, like behind the trees where no one ever hid. When George tried to find him, he suddenly heard a whisper behind him, even though Simon should have been far away. It's just a game, Simon said, stepping out from the shadows. By evening, things got even stranger. Simon asked to stay for dinner, and Mummy Pig invited him to join. Are you from the next village? Mummy Pig asked. I'm from far away, Simon replied quietly, not taking his eyes off his plate. During dinner, he hardly ate, and instead stared at everyone, especially Peppa. After the family went to bed, Peppa noticed Simon still standing in the garden, staring at the house. The next day, Simon came back. He started inviting Peppa and George to play unsettling games. One game was called Look into the Dark. Simon led them into a dark corner of the shed and said, Look closely. You'll see something interesting. But instead of something fun, Peppa felt a chilling cold, and Simon's shadow in the darkness seemed to move on its own. One evening, Peppa heard whispering outside her bedroom door. She cautiously peeked out and saw Simon standing in the hallway. His eyes were now glowing red. Peppa, come with me. We'll be best friends forever, he whispered. Terrified, Peppa called for her parents, but when they arrived, Simon was gone. The next day, George disappeared. All they found was his toy dinosaur, abandoned in the garden. Simon appeared again and said, Don't worry, he's with me. He's happy. Peppa realized Simon wasn't a friend, but something far more sinister. She tried to make him leave, but he just smiled and said, You're next.
One evening, when the usual quiet filled Peppa Pig's house, Peppa noticed something strange in her room. On the carpet, right by her bed, lay a small yellow toy. It looked like a little creature with huge black eyes and a wide smile, too straight and motionless to be friendly. George, look, Peppa said, picking up the toy. We've never had this one before. George shrugged. Maybe it's your new toy. But Peppa was certain she had never seen it before. The toy was light but strangely cold, as if it wasn't made of fabric at all, but of something damp and alive. The next day, she noticed something even more disturbing. On the wall, directly across from her bed, a new window had appeared. It was narrow and tall. Beyond the glass stretched a thick forest full of fog, and among the trees moved dozens of little figures, all exactly like her toy. They stood motionless, staring straight into her room. "Mummy, look!" Peppa called. "There's a window, and the toy is smiling." But Mummy Pig saw nothing. To her, it was just a wall, and the toy wasn't there at all. "You've been playing too much, Peppa," Mummy said gently. "It's time for bed." That night, Peppa woke to a whisper. The toy was sitting on her pillow, quietly repeating, "We're waiting for you. Look through the window." Beyond the glass, the forest was alive. The creatures moved closer, and there were even more of them now. All of them whispered in one voice, "Join us!" Each night, Peppa woke to the same whisper. At first, it was only words. Then she noticed her skin turning a faint shade of yellow. George tried to tell their parents that his sister looked strange, but they only smiled, not seeing anything unusual. On the third night, Peppa's eyes began to darken. She stared into the mirror for a long time, watching as the whites turned grey, until finally they became two black circles. On the fourth night, there were even more creatures in the forest. Their ranks stretched between the trees, and all of them reached out thin hands toward the window. The whisper grew louder, their voices blending into a single chant. "Soon you will be one of us! They're my friends!" Peppa whispered to George. "Soon you'll see them too!" On the fifth night, her smile grew wider and froze on her face, just like the toys. George began to cry and ran to his parents, but they only patted his head. "It was just a dream," said Mummy Pig. By morning, when they returned to the room, Peppa looked normal again. The toy had vanished, but at night it always came back. The sixth night was the longest. Peppa sat by the window, speaking with the creatures. At first, she whispered, then she spoke aloud. She repeated the words they taught her, words George didn't understand. The forest seemed to sway in rhythm with her voice, and the shadows appeared to move with her breath. On the seventh night, everything ended. Peppa stood by the window. Her skin was now fully yellow, her eyes black, her smile stretched so wide her face no longer looked like her own. The toy sat beside her, whispering, "The time has come." The creatures in the forest parted, opening a path. Peppa stepped toward the glass and vanished into it, as if it had turned to water. The room was empty. On the windowsill lay a small yellow toy. Now it whispered to Mummy Pig whenever she entered the room. A week passed. George was playing when he noticed a new toy lying on the floor, exactly the same as Peppa's. On the wall, another window had appeared. In its depths, shrouded in fog, stood Peppa. She was smiling her wide smile and calling to her brother. The cycle had begun again. This is the story of what happened when Peppa Pig's family went to the beach for what they thought would be a normal day. But sometimes, the most dangerous predators wear the most innocent disguises. It was a sunny day when the pig family arrived at the beach. Peppa was building sandcastles when she noticed strange footprints in the sand. Clear impressions of sneakers leading directly from the ocean onto the beach. "Daddy, look at these footprints," Peppa called out. Daddy Pig chuckled. Someone probably just walked into the water wearing their shoes. But Peppa followed the sneaker prints towards some large rocks. As she got closer, she heard soft melodic humming. Tra-la-lilo, tra-la-la. Peppa crept around the rocks and gasped. Sitting on the sand was an enormous shark wearing bright blue Nike sneakers, singing happily to itself. Tra-la-lilo, tra-la-la, the shark sang, noticing Peppa. It grinned with rows of sharp teeth. "Hello there! Want to play?" Despite her fear, Peppa found herself playing beach ball with the creature, watching as it skillfully kicked the ball with its sneaker-clad fins. "You're really good at this," Peppa laughed. Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la! I love to play, the shark sang back. That evening, a loud knock echoed through their house. When Daddy Pig opened the door, there stood the shark, still wearing its blue sneakers. Hello, I've come to visit. Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la, the shark announced, pushing inside and making itself at home. The shark squeezed through the doorway and began devouring everything at the dinner table. Plates, food, even the tablecloth. What on earth is happening? Mummy Pig exclaimed. I was hungry. Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la. It sang with its mouth full. From that day forward, everything changed. The shark decided to stay and established new rules. Everyone had to wear sneakers and sing tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la throughout the day. The shark took over Peppa's bedroom, forcing her to sleep on a mat. One night, Peppa and George tried to sneak out, but the shark was waiting at the door. Where do you think you're going? Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la, nobody leaves my family. It sang menacingly, dragging them back inside. The house transformed quickly. Windows were sealed with thick glass, water filled the lower floors, and a sign appeared reading, Danger, aggressive shark inside. Neighbors would walk by and hear singing from inside, Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la. We're all one family now. Through the round window, you could see them, Peppa, George, Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig, all wearing blue sneakers, all singing the shark's song. Behind them, the massive silhouette swam in circles, its toothy grin never fading. And so the shark had found its perfect family. The beach was quiet again, but if you listen carefully, you might still hear it. Tra-la-li-lo, tra-la-la. And if you do, you'd better run, because the shark is always looking for new family members to join its endless song. Peppa Pig, The Cracks. It started as just a tiny line, almost invisible in the corner of Peppa's bedroom. She thought it was just a crack in the paint. Maybe someone had bumped into the wall. Mummy, look, she said that evening, pointing. Mummy Pig glanced over, nodded and said, The house has probably settled a bit. Nothing to worry about. Daddy will fix it. But Daddy forgot, and the crack stayed. The next day, Peppa noticed it had grown longer. Now it stretched upward slightly, like a tree branch reaching toward the ceiling. That's strange, she muttered. Maybe I'm imagining it. But each day, the crack grew, first thin, then a little wider. After a few days, it curved unnaturally, like someone had drawn it with a finger. More cracks appeared nearby, one, then another. Is our house okay? Peppa asked Daddy Pig. Of course, he laughed. Walls crack sometimes, we'll fix it. They never did. A week later, the whole wall was laced with thin cracks. Some of them vanished during the day, only to return by night. One night, Peppa woke up and saw the crack moving, slightly, as if something inside was breathing. She got out of bed and walked closer, pressed her ear against it. Inside, a sound. Very quiet, scraping. A knock, slow, 3 taps, a pause, 2 more. Peppa jumped back. George, she whispered. Her brother was asleep, breathing steadily. In the morning, she found a small, dusty scrap of paper beneath the crack, very old, almost falling apart. On it, a single word, open. Peppa didn't tell her parents. She covered the crack with bandages, several layers, then hung a picture over it. But by nightfall, the picture had fallen. The tape was torn away. New lines appeared on the wall, not cracks anymore, almost like letters. She backed away to the door, but the door wouldn't open. Something inside the wall was moving, slowly, like it was exhaling. She screamed. Mummy and Daddy rushed in. It's, Peppa gasped, pointing. But on the wall, nothing, no cracks, no words, just a perfectly smooth surface. You probably had a bad dream, said Mummy Pig gently. Let's try to forget about it. But Peppa couldn't forget, because that night, when she turned to face the wall, she saw movement right where the crack had been, and then a voice, a whisper. I'm almost out, don't turn around.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. Peppa was helping Mummy Pig water the plants in the garden, but the flowers seemed to wilt and turn black as soon as the water touched them. The vibrant green leaves shriveled, and the colorful petals curled inward, revealing thorny, twisted stems. The soil beneath their feet began to crack and crumble, revealing not earth, but a dark, pulsating mass. A low, rhythmic thumping sound emanated from deep within the ground, like a giant heart beating. The air grew heavy with the scent of decay and something sweet, yet sickly. The familiar garden gnomes, usually so cheerful, now had vacant, staring eyes, their painted smiles frozen in a grotesque rictus. The garden, once a place of beauty and life, was transforming into a barren wasteland. The thumping grew louder, and the ground beneath them trembled. Dark, thorny vines erupted from the cracked earth, snaking their way around the wilting plants, their thorns dripping with a viscous, black liquid. The sun, usually so bright, was obscured by a thick, unnatural mist that rolled in from the edges of the garden. The sound of buzzing insects filled the air, but these were not ordinary bees. They were large, black, and their wings beat with an ominous hum. The garden shed, usually a place for tools, now seemed to pulse with an internal, sickly green light. The plants, once their friends, were now turning against them, their thorny branches reaching out like grasping claws. The garden was no longer a place of growth, but of consumption, slowly devouring everything in its path. The thumping intensified, and a large, dark maw opened in the center of the garden, revealing rows of jagged, crystalline teeth. The house, their home, felt miles away, and the garden had become a living, breathing nightmare.
It all began subtly. Peppa was the first to notice that her little brother George had changed. At first, it was just small things. He became quieter than usual, stopped laughing, and played less with his favorite dinosaur. He often sat on the floor by the window, tracing shapes on the carpet with his fingers. At first, Peppa thought it was just a game, but then she realized the shapes were always the same. Circles, and in the center of each, two long stretched eyes. "George, what are you drawing?" she asked, trying to peek closer. But he didn't answer. His gaze was empty, as if he wasn't looking at the drawings at all, but sinking somewhere deep inside himself. With each passing day, it grew worse. George stopped responding to her words, ate less and less, and at night, Peppa heard him whispering strange words in his sleep. Sometimes he would get up and stand motionless in the middle of the room, his eyes fixed on the darkness. One evening, he finally looked up at her, and Peppa's heart froze. His eyes were completely empty. The smile stretching across his face was unnatural, alien. "I'm not George anymore," he whispered in a low, hollow voice. One that didn't belong to her brother, but to someone older, someone else entirely. And after those words, he simply melted into the darkness. Peppa screamed, called for her parents, but they only said she must have had a nightmare. The next day, George returned. He sat at the table, eating porridge, as if nothing had happened. But when Peppa met his gaze, he leaned toward her and whispered, "You're next." On the floor lay his dinosaur, torn to pieces, threads sticking out, strange red marks on its body, as if clawed fingers had ripped through it. Peppa could no longer pretend nothing was happening. She noticed something else. In the hallway mirror, George's reflection lived its own life. When George himself sat still, the reflection turned its head and stared at her. Sometimes its lips moved, and one day, Peppa clearly heard, "He is already with us." No adult noticed anything. Mummy and Daddy said everything was fine, that George was healthy. But deep inside, Peppa felt it. Her brother was slipping away into somewhere else, and she was powerless to stop it. A few days later, he was gone for good. His bed was empty. On the pillow lay a piece of paper, the letters jagged and crooked. "He is with us now." Peppa clutched the note, her hands trembling. The house felt colder. The silence hung heavy and thick. That night she awoke to a strange sound. From the bathroom came a droning murmur, but it wasn't water. It was a melody, faint, hollow, as if played on an old radio. Peppa tiptoed down the hallway, each step echoing loudly. She pushed the bathroom door open and froze. Something was crawling out of the toilet. Its body writhed, slick with slime. Its eyes glowed red, and mingled with the bubbling sound was a dreadful melody. The same haunting tune, repeating again and again. Tralalelo, tralala. It seemed to sing, the sound spreading through the pipes, through the walls, straight into her head. Peppa gripped the doorframe, her whole body shaking. The creature was enormous, rising higher and higher, stretching its long arms toward her. Its head tilted to the side, moving slowly, and then it shook, as if to say, "You can't run." Peppa's throat went dry. She tried to scream, but no voice came out. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The thing slithered closer, its red eyes burning brighter, the melody swelling until it filled the entire house. Peppa stumbled back, step by step, until her back hit the wall. She knew this was connected to George, his disappearance, his words, the strange patterns on the floor. All of it led here. And then she saw him. On the shelf in the hallway sat Labubu, her favorite toy, always harmless before, but now his eyes glowed red and his smile was twisted. He didn't move, yet his gaze said clearly, "You're next." Peppa felt the cold seep inside her. She realized George had only been the first. Now, it was her turn.